send it out later. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Tricia Sistrunk, and I am managing the CCAP group for the Foundation for the Carolinas. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We were, of course, hoping that we could meet in person, but COVID is just not cooperating with us. So in any event, we are excited that you all are Zooming in with us today for our first event of the fall. And I hope you all came ready to participate. One of the advantages of being part of the CCAP group is learning from our peers. And today, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities to share with each other and ask questions of our speaker. So before we begin, I will just ask everyone to make sure that they're on mute. It'll help us hear whoever's speaking. There will be opportunities, like I said, for you to come off mute and ask questions, or you can put your questions in the chat and we'll be sure and get to them. But I say that with the videos that we'd love to keep them on. If you don't want to, if you're eating your lunch, that's fine. I understand, and you don't want to be on video, but we love to see your smiling faces as well. It's a privilege for me to introduce you to our speaker today, Stan Litow. Stan has a very impressive resume, and unfortunately, I am not going to be able to do it justice here, but I am going to hit on some of the highlights for you. Stan is a professor at both Columbia and Duke University. At Duke, he also serves as an innovator at residence. Stan previously served as Deputy Chancellor of Schools for New York City Public Schools. He was the president of the IBM International Foundation and president of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs for IBM. Before his service at IBM and the New York City Public Schools, he served as president and founder of Interface, a major New York City think tank. He also served as executive director of the New York Urban Corps. Stan helped devise the innovative school to college to career program called P-TECH, as well as the IBM Corporate Service Corps, which has often been called the corporate version of the Peace Corps. Stan is the author of The Challenge for Business and Society, From Risk to Reward, and co-author of Breaking Barriers, How P-TECH Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. He's also a frequent columnist for Barron's. So I had the benefit of receiving some advanced copies of Stan's books, and I thought they were very insightful and perhaps timelier than ever in light of the multiple crises that our society faces. His book, The Challenge for Business and Society, is what I consider a call to action to the private sector to help solve these crises. He thoughtfully explains how this approach is not only essential for society, but also for corporate sustainability and success. Hopefully you all were able to pick up your copy of The Challenge for Business and Society, but if not, it's not too late. I'll share more information on that towards the end, as well as how you can order his other book, Breaking Barriers, at a discounted rate. And I was reading through the reviews for Stan's book, The Challenge for Business and Society, and I think one of the reviews by Daniel Lebetsky sums up my introduction best. Daniel states, Stanley is an eminent and foremost mentor in the space of business and social responsibility, so his contributions present a great opportunity for a broader audience to benefit from his invaluable and almost unmatchable experiences. For decades now, Stanley has been navigating the realities between market forces, civic needs, and the space that exists to align them and reinforce one another. Full time when society has no option but to figure out how to deploy business power for the benefit of humanity, Stanley's voice is vital. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Stan Litow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Tricia, and I'm delighted to be with you. I wish we could be together in person. Maybe there'll be an opportunity later on, but I do want to make this as interactive as possible. So if anything I say stimulates a question, please feel free to ask it in the chat. I hope we'll have plenty of time after I talk to be able to get into a dialogue and answer any questions that you have. So you heard from Tricia a little bit about my background. I started off in government working for the mayor. I moved on to the not-for-profit world, running a think tank and an advocacy organization outside of government, then went back in to become Deputy Chancellor of Schools for the city of New York, and then walked into the private sector based upon my experience and very little government very little private sector experience, and eventually had a career of almost 25 years working for 3 CEOs at the IBM company, having responsibility for their foundation, corporate affairs, corporate citizenship, corporate social responsibility, you name it, for a global company. And as I was preparing for my retirement, one of the things that I was struck by was how toxic the environment in our nation has become, and how many people were accusing the private sector of misbehavior. And obviously, as somebody who had spent a career in the private sector, I knew that the behavior of some companies does not reflect on the behavior of all companies. We went through the Bernie Madoffs, we went through the examples of company missteps, whether Volkswagen or a variety of companies, Bank of America, you name it. But I really felt that there really needed to be a book that would look at the history of business and society so that people could be informed, not by opinion, but by fact. And when we look at the history of corporate behavior across the United States, those examples of bad behavior, you can find them in almost every year, every decade. It's not something that is unique to any time period. Going back more than 100 years ago, we had the robber barons. We talked about bad behavior. Even some companies that didn't behave totally badly made mistakes in what they did. You know, Andrew Carnegie, who we remember today for his leadership over his company, his leadership in philanthropy, the fact that we owe the public library system to Andrew Carnegie's donations and his public spiritedness. We know that in a difficult period of time when his employees were angry because many were getting fired and many were having their salaries depleted because of an economic downturn, he hired Pinkerton guards and shot people dead on the street. He regretted it for the rest of his life. It wasn't that he was a bad person, and it wasn't that his company was bad. He made a mistake. And that's not to say that there aren't lots of mistakes. On the other hand, as you know, in the private sector today, that's not how we would characterize all private sector behavior. So when we look at it historically, one of the things I wanted to point out in the book is it was the year 1870 that a business called Macy's developed the first free healthcare program for all of its employees. Nobody who worked for any government entity had free healthcare, but Macy's decided to do that. The CEO of the company decided to do that to build loyalty, to enhance productivity, and it became something that many, many other companies adopted back at the end of the 19th century. Now, most people think that the concept of health insurance or healthcare was something that was mandated by government. It was something that private sector entities only entered into it because they had a tax incentive to do so. But really, the research and the data demonstrates that that's not the case. 5 years later, in 1875, another US company, American Express, established the first pension plan. So any employee at age 60 at that time who had worked for American Express for 20 years could retire at their full salary. Now, it's true that at that time in 1875, the average life expectancy was not a whole lot longer than that 60-year period. On the other hand, developing that pension plan, again, before government did so, and not based upon a regulation or a legislation, was something that a company did, and many other companies followed suit. That's a couple of examples, but it doesn't end there. Where did the concept of paid vacation come from? Did it come from government? No, it came from the private sector. And again, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the first decade, there were somewhere between 400 and 500 companies that pledged to offer 1 week of paid vacation. If you worked for the state of North Carolina or the state of New York back in 1904, they were closed on Christmas, but employees did not get paid. But if you worked for a large number of companies in the United States, the concept of 1 week of paid vacation wasn't, again, it wasn't regulated, it wasn't legislated, it was a progressive labor practice, just like healthcare, just like pension plans, just like a range of things that were provided for employees that were pioneered by people in the private sector. In 1920, the CEO of Kodak, George Eastman, he took 1/3 of all of his stockholding and he gave it to his employees as an incentive to build loyalty for the company. And that was can you imagine today if the CEO of a very valuable company like Google or Facebook took 1/3 of all their stock and gave it to their employees? Or if that were something that was done as a routine matter to build loyalty among your staff. So there are lots of examples of companies historically that didn't behave like the robber barons, that didn't do bad things, that did things that were highly progressive. You know, I retired from IBM, and while I was writing this book, had access to the IBM archives, and I was able to read the story of Social Security. The Social Security legislation passed, signed into law by the President of the United States, and the then Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins, the first woman cabinet member in the United States, went out to every consultant that she could find, and they all told her that it would take at least 2 years to implement Social Security, given the challenge of so many employees, so many businesses, and the technology desert in terms of being able to do this in an effective manner. And she reached out to the CEO of the IBM company, Tom Watson, who talked to his staff, and they told him that the 2-year timeline was true, but there was a machine that they were tentatively calling a collator, that they thought that if he gave them the right resources, they could develop the machine, they could implement Social Security, and they felt it could be implemented within a little longer than a 1-year time period, not 2. But they told him that if you make this investment, you're not going to get a nickel of your money back because this is a competitive bid. And if we won, we're not going to get paid for the machines that we construct. And he made the decision to make the investment. Social Security was up and running in 10 months, not a year, not a year and a half. And within 4 years, he doubled the size of his company. So that was what we would characterize today as a public-private partnership. And then in the 1950s, the first integrated manufacturing plant opened below the Mason-Dixon line, opened by IBM in Lexington, Kentucky, because the governor of Kentucky, who assured IBM that if they came to the state, it would have to be a segregated plant, ultimately relented, because of the company's refusal to relocate into the state of Kentucky, unless the schools would be integrated and unless the employment facilities would be integrated. So there are examples where companies have led, not one company, multiple numbers of companies, in a historical kind of way, whether it's the environmental activities, some companies going back to the early 1970s, producing regular yearly environmental reporting and pioneering in areas of environmental safety in their companies, long before anybody was talking about climate change. So we've got lots of examples in our history of that kind of progressive behavior. Long before regulation, long before legislation, done as a way of melding what is a company's interest, which is the benefit of its shareholders, the benefit of its employees, and the benefit of community. Now, we know today a group of companies got together under the rubric of the Business Roundtable and signed a pledge saying they don't only care about their shareholders, they care about their employees, they care about community, But the reality is that isn't something that is only news today. It's something that we have in the experience of the history of corporate behavior. And again, this is not to say that there aren't people who violate the public trust. Enron, a clear example of bad behavior by a company. And bad behavior should be regulated so that companies don't behave badly. On the other hand, let's look through the lens of history. And the lens of history tells us that bad behavior has nothing to do with where your check comes from. Sometimes government behaves badly. Sometimes the not-for-profit world behaves badly. Sometimes the private sector behaves badly. But if we're looking for examples of the absolute best behavior, the most progressive behavior, you can find it in the history of corporate behavior. So there was good, yes. There was bad, yes. There was ugly, yes. But it had nothing to do with whether or not you were working for a profit-making company. Lots of examples of good. So let's move on now to the next slide. So where are we today? We do have examples of best practices. Many companies operating in a really effective way to help imprint not just their shareholders, but to imprint on society. JP Morgan, a good example of a company that has launched a model based upon the IBM Corporate Service Corps, where they have sent in top talent from the company, working with cities to improve investment in women and minority-owned business and growth of women and minority-owned business. American Express had a specific focus on building the skill and talent in the not-for-profit sector. Company like AT&T, they focused on 100,000 of their employees who were at risk of losing their jobs because AT&T was moving from working on hardware in the field to advanced social skills connected directly to software. But they had a couple of options. They could fire 100,000 people and hire people to replace them, or they could upskill the quality of the people on their workforce, who were many of them high performers, but needed additional education and skills. The CEO of the company appropriated over $250 million to invest in a reskilling and upskilling of his workforce. Some of it on their own time, some of it on the company's time, some of it in person, some of it online, and basically saved a large number of jobs and created a model that a variety of other companies could follow up on. Many companies providing more incentives for their employees, not just to contribute financially. Companies have been doing matching grants programs forever, but instituting programs where they match an employee's community service or voluntary service time in the community. At IBM, if an employee volunteered 40 hours in a year, that triggered a grant from the company to the place where they volunteered their time. The PTech program, which I've written about in the book Breaking Barriers, and now has over 600 companies around the United States and globally serving as partners, mentors students, provides paid internships to students, makes commitments about hiring practices. And as a result, 10 years after the first school was launched, there are 266 PTech schools following this model, school to college to career, across 13 US states, 28 countries outside the US, and all demonstrating positive behavior by companies, and not just IBM. Thomson Reuters hiring large numbers of students, Corning doing the same, Tesla doing the same, Global Foundries doing the same. So there are examples of that progressive behavior from the private sector that I talked about historically into where we are today. Now, over the last very recent past, over the last year, year and a half, or 2 years, in the shadow of COVID, in the shadow of George Floyd, a lot of companies are talking about what they can do and will do to address the issues of diversity and inclusion. A group of CEOs got together and formed a new not-for-profit organization called 110, making a commitment over a 10-year period that the companies who are part of 110 will hire 1 million new Black employees across their company. They hired Maurice Jones, the former head of LISC, Local Initiative Service Corporation, to help the companies figure out exactly how they're going to turn a pledge over a 10-year program period into reality. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and a group of other companies made a specific pledge in a city like New York to hire 100,000 low-income employees, people of color, into their companies. And again, over a 10-year period, they hired the former president of LaGuardia Community College at the City University of New York, Gail Mello, on behalf of these companies to set up a pipeline and grow a pipeline so that they would be able to hire more people of color into their companies. This is a challenge that companies are stepping up to the plate and making commitments, some of them doing large-scale employee training programs. Ralph Lauren, a good example of a company training its employees across the United States to enhance and improve their diversity and inclusion skills, and also doing the same to build the capability of retail outlets that sell their goods. We have companies who are moving also into their leadership and their supply chain, making pledges about the percentage of their supply chain that will be women and minority-owned business. Companies making a pledge of billions of dollars in supply chain spend that will go to women and minority-owned business, because they know it's not just their own workforce that needs to be more diverse, but that they can use the power and clout of their supply chain spend to enhance the ability of women and minority-owned businesses to grow independently. Because we know that if a small business enters into the supply chain of a Fortune 500 company, in 2 years, they're likely to double their workforce and significantly increase their revenue. And that's another potential impact that companies could have in looking at their supply chain. Many of us look at the supply chain within our companies as a potential risk overseas, because if you didn't pay enough attention to the supply chain that you were working with, you might find out that they were violating a variety of local laws on youth employment or health of the workplace. But this isn't only about outside of the US, it's about all of your supply chain spending. We've also seen a shift in the investment strategies now of a variety of companies, recognizing the importance of social responsibility and embedding it into their investment strategy. So you have a large company like Carlyle providing access to capital at reduced rates if companies can exhibit a broader diversity and inclusion in their governance of their company, in their workforce, and a variety of other ways that demonstrate that they will pay attention and offer incentives for companies that are operating more effectively in their financial practices. We have examples of BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock saying, we're not going to make our resources available to companies that don't have a strong CSR imprint. And that message is felt by people, across the globe, in understanding that perhaps something that you thought of as a nice to have is now integrated into the company. Corporate social responsibility isn't just about corporate philanthropy. It's important to be sound in terms of your corporate philanthropy, but it's about employee engagement. It's about your labor practices. It's about diversity and inclusion. It's about your environmental practices. It's about all of those things. So where are we today? We've got examples of not just good behavior, but the best behavior. And again, I would argue the leadership of the private sector really has redefined what corporate social responsibility looks like. Now, the question, of course, is, will there still be bad behavior? And the answer is yes. We still have examples of bad behavior. But can we continue to raise the bar? Can the examples of good behavior be incentivized so that larger numbers of companies are operating in a more effective way? I believe we can. Can we move on to the next slide? Bad behavior continues. We see them. Enron, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Countrywide, WorldCom, Volkswagen, Wells Fargo, many learning from their bad behavior and improving. Wells Fargo, a good example. Volkswagen, another good example. But will this continue? I think so. We have pieces of legislation. The Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act is one. But we find that why are there companies that are continuing to be penalized under Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act because of their behavior? Because it will continue, not just overseas in your foreign practices, but in your US practices as well. Will other legislation be in the offing that will clamp down on bad behavior? Potentially, but is there another side of this? Is there an opportunity in the future to incentivize and the best behavior? So one of the things I tried to do in the book, The Challenge for Business and Society, is not just to say where we were historically, good, bad, and some of the best, where we are today, good, bad, and some of the absolute best, but where will we be in the future? Will we be able to be criticized continually for bad behavior, or are there going to be examples where the best practices meld from examples of good behavior into more models of the best behavior, where they're picked up across a variety of different sectors of the economy? So let's move on to the next slide. A different way forward. What are the things I think we want is we want to create a culture of ethics and service in all private sector enterprise. What do we know about our education systems? Many of you went to a range of different higher education institutions. Was there one class in ethics? Was there one class in civics that you took? Many private sector, many business schools will offer a course on CSR or a course on ethics. But is ethics and civics part of the way we teach finance, marketing? Is that embedded in how we teach in the private sector? No, it really isn't. What about law? What about other areas of higher education? Is civics a basic component in how we teach people and educate them to be doctors or to be in all healthcare? So perhaps going forward, we could create a better culture of ethics and service if community service, if ethics were part and parcel of how we educated people across a variety of different academic disciplines. And it's not just about higher ed. I'm a trustee of the State University of New York. We have 60 campuses across New York State. Very few of them require education, a strong education background in ethics. But it's not just higher ed. We could do this in our elementary and secondary schools. And it doesn't have to be a freestanding class or course in civics. It can be using examples of ethics and civics in how we teach every class or course. Could ethics and civics be part of how you teach math or science or English or history? Of course it could be. Could there be opportunities for young people to be involved in community service, not just waiting for AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps, but to make practicum an opportunity in community service to be part of our educational experience? I think so. And I think it would probably improve the ethics and the values of people coming into the workforce and make it easier for companies to build that culture within their workforce. And are there other opportunities? Yes, absolutely. Can we provide more opportunities from the private sector to be able to invest in a more effective way, provide more of those incentives for people to take advantage of the financing that they need by demonstrating that business and society meld together in how the company operates? I think we could have incentives for performance. One of the things I've always admired in the Bloomberg administration, when Mike Bloomberg became mayor of New York, he instituted letter grades for restaurants. So if you had high healthcare standards in your restaurant, you got an A. If you weren't as high, you got a B. If you were a little further down, you got a C. And if you were really wanting, you got a D or an F. Now, if you were walking down the streets in a city and you had an opportunity to walk into a restaurant and spend your money, would you want to go in if they had a D in the window or a C in the window? Probably not. And the fact that, you know, restaurants competed to have an A letter grade was something that enriched their pocketbook. It benefited their companies. You could see a similar kind of process instituted by mayors or governors if you wanted to incentivize companies to have the best behavior, set a variety of different benchmarks about how you would demonstrate high performance in the CSR space. And if you met those criteria, you could get an A. Voluntary, no penalizing anybody, but just giving people the ability to recruit top talent, to advertise it to your clients or your customers, to be able to have an incentive to be able to demonstrate the best behavior going forward. Would other companies want to be an A company in whatever community you're in, whether it's in New York or in North Carolina or in South Carolina or Georgia, wherever you're operating? Would you want to be a high performer? You know, companies could be have an opportunity to have incentives to participate in government funding operations. It's possible to provide other kinds of incentives. But I think as we look at corporate social responsibility, it's not just one thing. It's your supply chain, it's diversity and inclusion, it is incentives for performance, it's leadership and tri-sector partnerships, it's creating this culture of ethics. And all of these things can be done so that we have a higher level of performance in the private sector. And I don't think hurling grenades at people in the private sector is the best way to get that higher quality of performance across the private sector. I believe the best way to get high quality performance is to create a culture where companies will want to follow the models of the highest performance and want to significantly improve their behavior because they will be rewarded for it. Now, you know, I teach a course at Duke on the challenge for business and society from risk to reward. And my students at Duke, many of them in the public policy arena, are interested in a career in the private sector because they are looking for a way that they could influence society in a positive way. And they're increasingly understanding that is possible if you work in the private sector. Do you know that at the Harvard Business School, there are more students in the Social Enterprise Club than every one of the clubs on campus all put together? That when you look at the top talent coming out of our higher education institutions today, and I can't imagine anybody on this call who represents a company that's not interested in hiring the best talent working in their company, especially in the crisis of COVID, where fewer numbers of people are coming into the workforce with the kind of skills that we want. People are looking for top talent, and they are recognizing the fact that that talent that's available with the best skills want to work for companies that have the right kind of platform in the area of CSR. So what does a company need to do? They need to get serious about CSR. They need to look at the companies that are the models for the behavior. They need to support their professional staff doing that work. They need to create the organizational, operational, and management structures that are going to be able to do that forward, and make sure that all the other business structures within the company are mobilized in an effective way. So it isn't just a question of silos working together. So let's move on to the next. Okay. What I really think is important now going forward is to think about some things that each of you could do effectively going forward that would improve the quality of what your company is doing in the CSR space. Is it only through checkbook philanthropy, or are there things that could be done by mobilizing the time and talent of your employees in an effective way? Very often, I find that that work done in the community improves the brand of the company, it improves the marketability of the company, and very often it creates business opportunity for the company. Is it an opportunity to have more of your employees serve on boards in a high-level capacity in the civil society? And there are lots of not-for-profit opportunities where somebody can not only benefit, but benefit by the networks of other board members that they would meet. But that has to be something that's integrated into how the company is going to operate from a CSR standpoint. I also think there are things that government could do effectively that could enhance more integration of the private sector in the way in which government operates. One of the suggestions I wrote about in the book is that as people are nearing retirement, there could be an opportunity to create teaching opportunities for people coming out of the private sector and looking for second career opportunities as teachers. They have a lot of skills, they have a lot of talent. And as we are having and experiencing a problem in terms of recruitment and retention of teaching talent, people coming out of the private sector with technical skills, business skills, and engineering skills, and a whole range of other skills could be moved into second careers as teachers. We have a lot of communities around the United States that have vacant space in schools. That vacant space could be an opportunity to bring in entrepreneurs, to grow the private sector, to provide more opportunity for growth in the private sector, and engage the private sector in mentoring opportunities, not only for students, but for teachers, for parents, and to create a better bridge between education and the private sector. So there are a lot of things that could be done moving forward into the future. This is not just a challenge for the private sector, but we are not going to make the progress that I think we can make if we allow the private sector, the public sector, the not-for-profit sector to be siloed. We've got to look at corporate social responsibility as something that is a responsibility for all sectors of society working collaboratively and together towards a mutual goal, which is to maximize our resources in an effective way and do it in a way that meets a higher standard. And I think there is reward at the end when we look at the research about companies who have high performance in the CSR space. Their stock also performs at a higher level. And I cited that in the book. There's examples that somebody did a study over a 20-year period. And if you had $1 to invest and you invested it in a company with a high performing area in CSR, they did 50% better on investment strategy wise versus companies that had poor performance in the CSR space. So it's an investment opportunity. It's recruitment and retention for top talent. It is improving your posture with your shareholders, And it is something that minimizes risk and maximizes reward over the long term. This is something that companies can do in an effective way to build the value of their business and build the value in society. So that's what I think the lesson of the book that I wrote is. But this isn't about one book, and it isn't about the experience of some companies. You know it very well because the people who are on this call, you're on the front lines. You know the challenges. You've got a lot of demands, a lot of pressures that are put upon you. But if we could raise the level of understanding about this work and explain to people in powerful positions within the private sector, but the same is true of the other sectors of society, and get us all on the same page working together, I think we could really make the kind of improvement that we really want to make and need to make. So I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but perhaps we'll have more. And why don't we start off with the first question?
Yeah, Kim asked, Kim, I don't know if you want to come off mute or I can read your question here in the chat. She says, is there an independent CSR ranking program for corporations, not awards, but a widely acknowledged ranking system? Also, would love more discussion around monetizing CSR. In other words, showing how CSR can impact the bottom line in a positive way.
Well, let me talk about the first thing, which is ranking and rating systems. Sadly, they're all over the lot. And many companies will complain bitterly that there are 20 or more different ranking and rating systems. They don't know which one they should pay attention to, which ones they should ignore. They look at the criteria and they're all over the lot. So I would say at this point, sadly, while there are a lot of ranking and rating systems that are out there, ranking the top 100 or ranking the top 10, there is not one that at this point people would say is the one that is the most listened to. Sadly, there are too many of them. I think if we're looking creatively into the future, perhaps leadership in the private sector needs to sit down and come up with a system that would be the best. I like the concept of a voluntary letter grade system, either at a state level or at a local level, where government could offer that ranking and rating system, set up an independent panel of people to view it with the right kind of private sector input to be able to set up a system, and that people would acknowledge on a local level makes sense. So there's not 10 or 20 different ranking systems for restaurants in New York City. There's one. Mm-hmm. And there could be one for companies if we exhibited the right leadership. And I think that's a challenge, I would say, for the CEOs in the private sector to take this one on. And perhaps we could lend some real credence and have this operating more effectively, going on into the future. Now, the second part of that question was monetizing CSR. And I believe there are lots of examples where CSR can be monetized. When I was at IBM, I asked the people in HR to do an analysis of when we were in a battle to recruit somebody with top talent into the company and we won. Where did CSR fit on somebody making their decision to accept the offer from IBM? And actually it was number 3. Number 1 was money. Number 2 was location. And number 3 was the fact that if you worked for the company, you could participate in something like a corporate service corps, where you would be sent around the globe in a team of top talent for a 1-month exercise in essentially the corporate version of the Peace Corps. But I think essentially what we're finding out is that there are ways to monetize CSR with your clients. There's a way to monetize it by looking at the behavior of your companies, but of your employees. When we set up the IBM Corporate Service Corps, each year 500 top talent in the company were selected to have 1-month assignments in the developing world, working in a team to solve a critical societal problem, right? So people could be sent to Nigeria to help implement the healthcare program in Nigeria. They could be sent into a team of people that would work on improving the environmental research efforts in Latin American geography. So people got real in-depth experience, but they also got an opportunity through their company to make a contribution into society. Those who participated in that program were top talent, and they were young top talent, and it significantly increased retention rates for top talent. And as you know, many companies, when they have top talent that are being poached by a competitor, they have a budget to match the salary or to provide additional financial incentives. But here, the CSR posture of the company was the way to keep people into top talent in the company. So I think it helps in recruitment, it helps in retention, it opens up business opportunities. Yes, I do believe that CSR can be monetized. And when you look at the potential for gaining investment dollars, whether it's BlackRock or Carlyle or any of the investment opportunities that private sector are looking at, and when those companies say access to our financial capital depends on your CSR platform, I think the message should be clear that it is something that can be monetized, and it is something that benefits your bottom line. Other questions?
I'll ask again. This is Kim Reynolds. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my other questions.
Sure.
I've taken lots of notes. You talked about incentivizing your associates for CSR activities. Would you mind providing some examples? That is not something we currently do at my company, meaning volunteerism is on your own time. There's no paid volunteer days, etc. So I just love your thoughts on that, what works well.
Sure. I mean, the example at IBM, we also did not give people time off for volunteering because that some companies do it. I'm sure there are people on this call that do it. I think that there are benefits to thinking about it that way, and that there are downsides to thinking about it that way. But saying that companies are incentivizing their employees to volunteer and contribute on their own time and will make a matching grant, matching their time and talent contributed with a grant by the company of $500 or $1,000 or an incentive, for goods of the company contributed, is basically telling the employees in a company that if you engage in significant amount of volunteer time, the platform, the barrier at IBM was 40 hours over a year. What we were able to do was to assess on a voluntary basis that our employees were contributing well over 1 million hours of volunteer time a year. And a lot of the work that they were doing was producing examples of the company's best skills, making a difference in community. And it was tying into a matching grant program that had been matching financial contributions, but now just extended it to matching volunteer time. It built more loyalty in the company. It built relationships in the community. People were meeting people that they were having an opportunity to see the company demonstrating its commitment by donating its time and talent into the community. So I think it had real benefit. And I think a lot of other companies are following that model.
Thank you.
I think we've got another question. A lot of CSR teams measure volunteer hours or dollars granted when measuring CSR programs. What metrics do you think are most critical? As I said, I think it is important to look at the posture of the company in terms of recruitment of talent and the support of your employees through their engagement in the community in making a difference on retention of top talent. And also in terms of, there's lots of research that demonstrates that people are more likely to do business with a company that has a strong CSR platform. So look at it as part and parcel of your customers and your clients, but also look at it as a way of building relationships in the community through your employees that will benefit you over the long term. You remember when Amazon's deal blew up and they were not able to locate in Queens? Some of the leadership of the company approached me about what could we have done differently. And I said, one of the things that you might have done differently is if you had built local women and minority owned business in that geography into your supply chain, if they were benefiting from doing business with Amazon, instead of you being on the street talking about what a good company you are and what you would do economically into that geography, you would have people in that community demonstrating and asking for you to be there. And it would have been very, very difficult for the political establishment to say, we don't want Amazon, if the local companies that they support were out there arguing for Amazon. So I think there are opportunities for companies to build their platform in the communities that they care about and in the among the customer base that they care about by using their business and their CSR platform to be able to do that. How can companies ensure that CSR stays top of mind for corporate leadership in the face of challenges, impact of COVID on business? I think that enhance knowledge among our business leadership, not just the CEOs of the companies, but senior leadership of the company. One of the reasons we're starting this new executive education program at Duke in the first week in December, offering a Duke credential and giving an opportunity for senior leaders across the company to participate in an online course in CSR to build their knowledge. And we're finding people who are signing up for it. They're not just the CSR professionals. They're the HR professionals, the finance professionals, the government relations teams, the CFOs in the company. I think this is an area of knowledge that a lot of people in that CSR space have, but we need to build that knowledge across the leadership in the private sector. And I think we can do it. And one of the advantages, there are lots of disadvantages of COVID, but a lot of people are participating in remote learning opportunities and offering that remote learning opportunity to build our knowledge base among corporate leaders on CSR is one. I don't want to do a commercial for the Duke program, but we'll have the chief sustainability officers from BlackRock, from Carlyle, from Fidelity. We'll have CEOs, we'll have government leaders explaining to people who sign up, what is CSR all about and how does it connect to the bottom line? And I think we can build our knowledge in a more effective way. And I think the companies will see the benefit of it if they participate in programs like this.
I'm trying to share, I was trying to share the link, but I will also send that link out to that executive program.
Great.
But I've shared the web page for now until I can get the link copied into the chat.
Yeah. Well, I also think I'm pleased that Duke is offering a credential from the university for professionals from the private sector who take this course and made it something that is easy to do because it goes over an 8 or 9 day period for, from 2:30 until 5 in the afternoon. So something that people can accommodate within their business schedule at an affordable price point of less than $2,000 per participant. But that's not just about one course. I think it's about building the knowledge base. And I think one of the things that you all know is that, when you have an opportunity to share your knowledge with the senior leaders in the company, they become advocates for the work that you do. And that was my experience. I always had the support of our CEOs, but I also had the support of the chief financial officer in the company and the chief marketing officer within the company and the board members within the company. And when you've got that kind of support built in enhanced knowledge, it's something that makes your job easier.
Stan, well, just as an aside, I think you had mentioned to me some potential government funding for some of these courses that I wasn't aware of. Maybe
Yes.
our group is, but just in case they're not.
Yes, one of the things that happened in the CARES Act before it was authorized by the Congress in December is that it provided for all employers over a 5-year period a tax incentive for anything up to $5,250 a year that you spent on tuition at any higher education institution in the United States. So if you have an employee in a company who wants to take courses in a college or university, either executive education or a credit-bearing course, whatever the course is, they can get a full tax deduction for that tuition payment up to $5,250 a year, every year for the next 5 years. So if a company wanted to pay the tuition for their employees to participate in a program like this, it's fully tax deductible.
I had a question, Professor Whitlaw. Thank you so much again for coming and speaking with us today. You mentioned a lot about how having CSR and those initiatives really impact and benefit your customer and letting them know that it is important to you as a company. Do you have any best practices, any strategies in how to share those different projects that you're doing that you've really seen work?
Yeah, I mean, there are entire companies that are built around this brand, a brand like Madewell. Their CSR platform is run by a Duke grad, Gonzalo Pertilli, but the entire brand of the company, Madewell, is built around the fact that they making commitments in their manufacturing process, their supply chain process, that everything will be made well, and that component is critical to their branding. And a lot of other companies have done the same thing to figure out how you promote your company brand to tie into CSR or elements of CSR. So I think that there are great opportunities. And I think having, companies like a BlackRock and a Carlyle saying you can have access to our capital at reduced rates and more advantageous opportunity to access our capital, or socially responsible investment funds continuing to increase their investment in companies that move into this platform, demonstrates that you can actually make the case that you have a clear bottom line benefit that's available to you, not just from one source, but from many, if you engage in promoting this. Now, you can also upgrade the quality of your CSR reporting and get it out there and build relationships with not-for-profit influencers in the community who can tell your story many ways better than you can tell it yourselves. So a lot of companies are thinking, well, are you asking us to advertise around our CSR platform? I think actually, if you can collaborate with community partners in the community, they can tell your story with your help in a way that is better than you can do it on your own or do it through paid advertising. Any other questions? Anyone? Well, I know we're, go ahead.
Well, Stan, before we started the meeting, you were talking about the business pledge to hire people of color, but we were talking about some of the issues that the pandemic is presenting with that. And I just would love for you to share that with the group as well, and what you see that, how far behind some of the students have fallen because of the pandemic, and what effect that's going to have, and how business can step up and help.
I think before the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about America's skills crisis. And we know that was not based upon rhetoric. It was based upon reality and data. What did we know? We knew that the large number of jobs that were good jobs, whether middle skill or higher skill jobs, overwhelmingly required a post-secondary degree. Now, we've had a lot of discussion by some saying college doesn't matter. But the reality is, when we look at the data, college really does matter. For somebody with a post-secondary degree going into the workforce over their career, they're going to earn on average 84% more than somebody who goes into the workforce with only a high school diploma. And people who go into the workforce only with a high school diploma are largely going to be at lower wage levels, paying less taxes over their lifetime. So post-secondary education and advanced skills absolutely matters. When we look at the most competitive job opportunities, well over 95% of them will require a post-secondary degree. And yet we know that for young people from low-income communities and young people of color, even those who graduate with a high school diploma and enroll in college, the college completion rates are very, very low. And that has been enhanced by COVID. Last year, in the first year of COVID, college enrollment for low-income students and students of color across the United States declined by 30%. 30%. It was the largest one-year decline in college enrollment since we've been studying the level of college enrollment. Now, why did that happen? It happened because large numbers of first-generation potential college goers had their high schools shut down. They didn't have access to guidance counselors. They didn't have access to teachers. And while middle and upper income students had parental support or other supports to apply to college, large numbers of low-income students did not apply at all. And even though now we have larger numbers of our high schools that are open and young people will have more access to teaching staff and guidance counselors and others, one of the things that we know is that the education achievement gap caused by COVID is making us a big impact on how many will get a high school degree and how many will be college ready with their degree. So if our private sector institutions are looking to address the skills crisis, they're looking to hire more young people of color and more people from low-income communities, they're going to have to do something to contribute to enhancing that pipeline. Now, the one initiative that I talked about, PTech, is an effort where school construct was changed from grade 9 to 12 to grade 9 to 14. And PTech schools across 13 states provide young people with an open enrollment model where there's no academic screen to get in, with the assuredness that they're getting not just a high school diploma, but over that integrated 6-year period, a college degree in a competitive area that an employer wants. So if the employer is IBM or Thomson Reuters or Tesla, they identify what are their critical employee skills, and those employee skills are taught in every academic subject area, whether it's math, science, English, history, problem-solving skills, presentation skills, collaboration skills in grade 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And students complete a high school diploma and a 2-year degree, incorporating those workplace skills so that there is a pipeline of young people that will be hired. I'll give you one example. Thomson Reuters partnered with one of those PTech schools in the city of Dallas. All they offered was to do mentoring, some paid internships, and they had 28 students from one of those high schools in Dallas that had paid internships with Thomson Reuters through this pipeline program. They hired 23 of 28 students because the pipeline, paid for by the public system, gave them a population of young people that they would hire. I think one of the things that we're learning as a consequence of COVID is that it's affecting the skill level It's affecting the population of people coming into the workforce. If we want companies to make commitments about changing their diversity and inclusion strategy to hire more people with those posture, they're going to have to improve the population that looks that way. And it's something that they're going to have to do collaboratively with our education partners, both in higher ed and in K-12. You know, when I was deputy chancellor of schools in New York City, there was a lot of resistance to working with the private sector. You know, we had the model of vocational education, and a lot of people in the civil rights community, they didn't want any part of vocational education because they saw it as less than in terms of career opportunities for people of color. I think it doesn't have to be your grandma's or grandpa's voc ed. It could be real career and technical education, which can combine workplace skills and education skill in a more effective way and create that pipeline for people to be able to improve the skill of their potential workforce by getting their partners in the public sector to be able to increase the level of education and skills of people coming into the workplace. At IBM, they're hiring for young people with the 2-year degrees coming out of P-Tech schools have been very strong and overwhelmingly hiring young people of color. And many of them have been promoted. Any other questions? Well, I've got a question for you. As you think about, based upon what you've heard from me, are there things that you think you would need help with going back into the workplace to be able to educate more of your colleagues about the importance of CSR? And what would it be that would be helpful for senior leadership in the company to understand more about the opportunity that's available to make a better connection? Do you think that people right now understand the potential reward? Do they adequately understand the risk potentially to them of not operating effectively in this space? So I'll ask each of you, do you have a thought about what's going on back at the ranch as people think about this, and what would be helpful to raise the level of knowledge and understanding about these issues?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Hi, this is Maya. I really enjoyed the discussion today. I think that one thing for our senior leadership is the need to understand the impact to the bottom line. I've heard, multiple requests for data, specific numbers around the impact and how CSR can really, not only increase viable candidates for hire, but also supplier diversity, those type of things, and why it's important, and literally how it affects the bottom line. What percentage of increase in revenue can we see?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I really did write about in the Challenge for Business and Society. I gave people an opportunity to see specifically quantifiable evidence that the companies delivered better return for their shareholders if you looked at high performers in the CSR space versus people on the other side. We also saw it in terms of evidence in enhanced recruitment and retention of top talent. I think in the age of COVID, companies are going to be very nervous about losing their talent to others who will up their offer and cherry pick their top talent and get them to come and leave the company as a consequence of that offer. And building better relationships with your employees through your CSR platform is critically important. I think it's also critically important for your customers. When we look at all of the survey data that shows that people are more likely to do business or want to do business with a company that has a stronger platform in the CSR space. And now in the finance area, knowing that you could get access to capital at reduced rates if you're able to demonstrate a higher level of performance in diversity and inclusion or in CSR, or you're at risk. One of the reasons why a lot of companies have upped their performance objectives in the environmental space is they're nervous about business that they could lose as a consequence of it. So I think on both sides of this, there's reward, quantifiable reward, access to capital, recruitment and retention of top talent, improvement in the client space, improvement in your supply chain, all quantifiable ways that you benefit yourself and get a reward as a consequence of high performance and strong behavior in CSR. And the other side of the coin is the risk. What's the risk if you don't? Is there a risk that you will not be able to recruit top talent? Is there a risk you won't be able to retain your top talent? Is there a potential risk that clients will walk as a consequence of your competitors having stronger behavior in the CSR arena? So I think the quantifiable evidence is there. It's a question of putting it in front of the people who are the deciders and the influencers so that they can look at the concrete evidence and make a decision. We're not asking people to contribute an arm and a leg. We're asking them to do what's right in an effective way, and they can see the returns. They can see the ROI. Each year when I would present to the senior leadership of the company and the IBM board the investment that we were making in CSR, I did quantifiable ROI specifically on all of the items that we talked about and made it clear that an investment of resource produces a real return on your investment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't be shy.
Well, I'll just echo what Maya said, but just understanding the importance of kind of marrying the two between customers, between the financial portions of a business, but even especially with hiring and retention, and how the associate sees the CSR efforts of a company with longevity of their own employment, but also for new eyes, and how we can use that to marry into their onboarding process and things like that to really show the heart and the purpose behind a CSR initiative. So,
yeah, I would say that it's both in terms of it definitely benefits your bottom line by there were a lot of companies who their employees spoke out in wanting the company to speak out on a variety of different issues. There was a group of employees working for IBM that signed petitions about why the company wasn't speaking out on a more positive stance on immigration. And it resulted in the CEO of the company doing just that. When the bathroom bill in Texas was a very, very high political issue, networks of employees and companies wanted their companies to be speaking out. They wanted them to consider moving out of the state of Texas. And many of them went face to face with government leaders and told them that this was something that was a risk. And their employees, they didn't want their employees to be reacting negatively towards the company as a consequence of their behavior in that area. When I was being introduced by Tricia, she read a quote from Daniel Lubetzky, the CEO of Kind, the health bar company. Kind, the health bar company, spoke out about a variety of issues in a social arena, especially guns and public safety issues. And they did so because a lot of their employees were urging the leadership of the company to speak out. I think we're seeing a change in that employee base. You're probably seeing it among your employee base. They are more interested in working for a company that has a strong platform in the CSR arena. And I think that companies that don't pay attention to that will suffer for it. They will. And in terms of like recruitment of top talent and getting the people with the best skills, I think it is something that people can legitimately pay attention to by creating more programming through your CSR activities, through your employees and other activities in the company to attract this population, especially to build a diverse pipeline into the company. You know, a number of companies are looking at, you know, not just their entry-level hiring, but what percentage of their executives are people of color? What percentage of their board leadership are women or people of color? And they're understanding that this high level of interest in these issues is not going to go away. It's going to increase. And as people start looking at what they are demanding of companies, one thing you can do is wait for the regulation to be in place and then figure out how to comply with it, but perhaps prevent regulation from being put in place by exhibiting the kind of behavior that makes it easier for government leaders to say, this is leadership that's taking place in the private sector now. And we don't need to regulate against it, but we need to recognize the high performance that we're getting. So as you think about this, would there be things that would be helpful to get to you to get that message across? Would it be, you know, having CEOs speak more vocally to influence other CEOs in this area? What effect did it have when 200 CEOs in the Business Roundtable signed that pledge saying they don't only care about their shareholders? Did it affect people within your company? Were people, you know, reacting to it in any way, shape, or form?
I can comment. This is Maya again. I definitely think that it made a huge impact with my company, Corning Incorporated. I think that, you know, there's a balance though that our senior leadership likes to take. So we're not necessarily ambulance chasing,
Right.
but we are definitely speaking out when we see things that just aren't right. And I think that, you know, any tools or anything that you may have to help navigate that space would be helpful. I know that when the George Floyd murder happened and the uprising was taking place, we banned Confederate flags anywhere on our premises, even in the parking lots, all that kind of stuff. And several other, and honestly, my office, the Office of Racial Equality and Social Unity, became a thing, reporting directly up to the senior leadership of the company. So it's really become a bedrock of divisions throughout Corning. So I'm interested to kind of know what kind of best practices or guidelines you have for taking a stand or speaking out on issues that aren't relevant to what we do, but are relevant to the people that are doing it, but are somewhat polarizing. So that's kind of my question. And then any tools you have to
thing is that companies that spoke out about gun violence after Charlottesville and diversity in a very forceful kind of way. There were a lot of people who thought, well, they're going to pay a price and it's going to be something that's going to be economically hurtful to those companies. There's actually no evidence that that took place. Whether it's Kind, the health bar company, Dick's Sporting Goods, the companies that spoke out did not pay a price in the marketplace. So as you're talking internally within a company about whatever that issue is, whether it's something where people are wondering, well, if the company speaks out about this important issue, whether it's diversity or guns or whatever it is, isn't there a price to be paid? There's actually no evidence that there was a price to be paid. So I think that's something that people should feel a little bit more comfortable about when they're called upon to speak out. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I'm suggesting that you speak out on every issue. I think it needs to be taken seriously based upon what the company is, cares about, and where you're doing business, and what you think. But if people are going to argue and say that every time you speak out, you have a risk involved, the actual risk turns out to be much more minimal, if non-existent, than people believed. Also, I think when the companies got together and signed that pledge about we don't only care about our shareholders, they did have a conversation that said signing the pledge is only step one. We're going to have to be able to demonstrate some evidence over time. They understood that just signing a pledge, that it may buy you time, but it doesn't provide a solution, because there will be people in the media who will look for the evidence of the companies that signed that pledge that said you cared more about your employees and cared more about community, not just about your shareholders. They will be looking for the evidence of it. And if they don't get it from the company, they'll get it from someone else. And that's where I think the risk comes in. And we don't know what that potential risk could be. When you think about, somebody that could, of the companies that are signing pledges about diversity in hiring, some of those companies have, less than 2% of their executives as people of color. Is that something that's going to be sustainable over a long term? Or as people start to look for who to and how to evaluate your performance in the D&I space, is it going to be only your entry-level hires, or is it going to be looking at your executive population? So I think that thinking that making a pledge over a 10-year period is enough, I don't think that works. I think people are going to be called to account for what kind of progress they've been able to make over a 2 and 3 year period. And the time to get ready for that is now. And I think that the rhetoric, some of it coming from the left, some of it coming from the right, anti-business rhetoric, I don't think it's going to stop. And I think the best way to protect a business against that is by doing the kind of work that you all do on a day-to-day basis, and making sure that the company provides a high priority in terms of that work. Anyone else? I'm interested to hear how people are organized within their company. One of the things that I did that CSR was organized within IBM is there was an office in charge of corporate social responsibility, but there was an advisory group that had dotted line relationships with all of the various elements of the CSR space, whether it was supply chain spend, the environment, government relations, HR, diversity and inclusion, so that it was used to make it easier to prepare our corporate responsibility reporting. We also did quarterly reports to the investment community, but it was easier to organize that because we shared information on a regular basis. Is that something that is part of how it's organized within the private sector entities on this call?
Yes, that's how it's organized with my company. We have actually a direct line, not a dotted line, to the senior leaders and decision makers. So we have a seat at the table, and the Office of Racial Equality and Social Unity is recognized worldwide. So we have a presence globally.
Oh, that's great. Anybody else in terms of how it's organized and managed within your companies?
This is Matt. I can go. I'm with Atrium Health, and we are the local not-for-profit hospital system. So we've kind of bounced around over the years. We were previously part of the marketing division, and then they pulled us out and put us under kind of a hybrid HR team. And now we've really formulated our own division of community and social impact underneath. I'm part of the community engagement team, and then there's also social impact. We've got community health. We've got a dotted line relationship right up into the C-suite. But we also have a lot of dotted line relationships. A lot of our work hinges on our market strategy. So we work closely with like our facility executives in the markets and helping make sure that, the work we do in Cleveland County or Gaston County or Stanley County, there's going to be some similarities in our CSR strategies, but also there's going to be some differences because these are different communities for us. And certainly we've got the Charlotte work as well, and that's going to obviously look different than as it relates to Cabarrus County, for example. So we work with those market executives within the footprint to kind of in a dotted line relationship. And in fact, if you go back 10 or so years into our past, this is where we all used to sit. We all used to sit within each hospital. There'd be the marketing person, the communications person, you had your own graphic designers, those type of folks. And so as our organization has grown and we sort of centralized that function, we've retained that dotted line into the markets to make sure that those facility executives who are also representatives of their community have a close connection to us and to our investment opportunities and our giving strategy and all that. And then of course there's like government relations, and there's so many other players that help us be successful. And we're still key partners with marketing, but that's sort of a little bit about how we are.
Well, that's important. I think that the organizational structure is critically important in being able to manage this effectively within a private sector entity. That the degree to which senior leadership is well versed in the issues and understand it, and then people down the food chain in all business units are part of a common kind of structure where people can understand exactly what the company is doing, what the benefits are, what the advantages are, what the potential risks are, so that they're operating in an effective way. Do you also feel, those of you who are on this call, that you have the ability to benchmark and understand as well as you can what your competitors or others are doing? Because I also find that there's somewhat of a gap in what people are able to understand about what others are doing to be able to pick up on the advantages and be able to emulate the advantage and be able to learn from the negative experience and make sure that you don't experience it. So would you feel like that is something that is part of your knowledge base, that the people within the company internally are well versed enough in what others are doing? Matt, I see you nodding your head. What do you
I'm
think?
sitting here thinking again, we I think CCAP's a great way and a great platform for us to make sure that we're keeping those connections open. So as you're asking that question, I'm thinking about my colleagues at Novant Health who, in most cases, people just assume that we're super competitors and we keep things close. But in many ways, we use this CCAP network and other ways to share best practices, to work together, to learn from each other. And right now, as we're in COVID, of course, there's all the changes with how are we going to present within the community, and what's we're both battling this pandemic. So how are we equitable to each other, and comparing our community event guidelines and making sure that we're consistent, because we're both serving this community and one of us shouldn't be over the other. And so certainly there are other things that maybe we keep a little bit closer through our own strategies, but in many ways we try to work together to achieve our successes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that is definitely one of the benefits for this CCAP group. And I think ideally, we need to share larger benchmarking studies, I think would be beneficial to this group. I try and look for them and search for them and share them when I find them, but I think maybe that's something that is lacking, or I haven't found it. But I think some some larger studies and best practices would be definitely beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's something that those in the higher ed community, I think, can help with. One of the things that we're doing in this Duke Exec Ed program is groups of grad students will provide a benchmark for the companies who attend this program. So you can see, what your advantages are, what your disadvantages are vis-a-vis others in this space that you're interested in. One other thing I wanted to make sure that I devote a little bit of time to here is, as people think about your posture in CSR, people think that it's this ranking and rating system that's the only way to achieve prominence in this area. But I really think that we should take much more seriously, from the private sector standpoint, the civil society influencer network. You all have relationships with not-for-profit organizations or civic organizations in your community. And you all know that they can have credibility about your behavior in this space in a way that you never will be able to have. So you can get up and talk about each company and what you've done around diversity and inclusion or management in your supply chain. But it's always taken with a grain of salt if it's coming from the mouth of the company that's exhibiting that work. And then thinking strategically about that influencer network and what's the best way to energize it to be able to work on your behalf should be part and parcel of how you think about the CSR opportunity and the space that you've got. So, obviously, the people who are the most influential in civil society. They're the people who are most often on social media. They're the people who are most often quoted in traditional media. They're the people that electeds most often respond to. They're the people who have the highest profile in the community. And making sure that that constituency of influencers is as informed about your activity in this area as possible. And whether that's done through a conscious marketing or a public information campaign, or it's done through more informal sharing of information, I think don't minimize the importance of that influencer network, because if that group of people that have influence over people's thought around issues like diversity and inclusion speak out publicly and can be relied on to speak out publicly when you need them, either when an event happens that you need to worry about or before that event happens, I think that influencer network is critically important. So you know who they are in the environmental space. If that's something that's important to you, you should know who they are in the civil rights arena or the diversity and inclusion arena. You should know who they are in every area of CSR, so that you're not waiting for the, shit to hit the fan to be able to look and see who you could get to speak out on your behalf, but that's built into how you handle CSR. From those who are on this call, any other observations about the influencer network? Is that something that is part and parcel of how you approach your relationships in community?
For me, definitely. We're on the community affairs. So under the Office of Racial Equality, Social Unity, we have government affairs, community affairs, and then HR, which is internal affairs. So for my colleague and I, who I think is not on the call anymore, but we literally go to all of the facilities, the areas throughout North Carolina. We meet with the community. So superintendents, elected official, local elected officials, church leadership, and then of course, just like community organizers, grassroots. We meet with those people. We went on about a 2.5-month listening tour when we first started and produced about a 67-page report on all the feedback that we received, including recommendations. And so once we established our projects and programs in community affairs, we were able to execute on, what the actual community said they needed or that would help, or what's already impactful and working well. So it was it wasn't a heavy lift for us, and it was an easy way to kind of get endorsement in the local community from those leaders.
I think that's very important. I think that's done in a very strategic kind of way. The other thing that's important when you look at those leadership organizations in the community, it's very easy to identify which ones of them have the highest platform and the deepest relationship with government leaders and government officials. Before COVID, you could easily see when they had an event, which government leaders generally showed up at what events involving those organizations. So you could easily see which ones of them had the largest and best relationships with people on the government side. And if you're a company that has built those relationships and it matches well with people in the government space, well, your government relations people will always know that that's helpful in terms of, in some ways, more helpful than even just writing a check to a government official in terms of their campaign coffers and stuff like that. But building those relationships with the community organizations that they value is something that's valuable to them and valuable to you.
And it also helped the sustainability of the projects that we were funding past our funding. So our goal now is to look for, sustainable funding models so that, we can build up that local economy with local residents.
That's very important. I think most people think that those not-for-profit organizations survive largely on private sector funding, when the reality is, look at the research done by, think tanks like Aspen and others. The largest amount of support for not-for-profit social service organizations comes from the government contracts. So if you're a supporter of those organizations, and in large measure, their majority of support is coming from government, and that's a relationship that is advanced by your support and done in a way that connects also to what they get and will need to get from government. I believe, do we have any other?
Well, I have a follow-up question to that. Chime in again. Do you have any ideas on kind of how you quantify relationships? I think that's always the $1 million question for us. Influencer relationships is very important to our work. As y'all were just talking about, sometimes those informal power and informal power and the electeds and the community collaborators, and power comes in so many different ways. And luckily we're in a position with my employer that that's recognized and that's important and that's valued, but you always wonder if things change and how do you kind of show your value. So how do you consider evaluating or quantifying relationships?
Well, one way is, using electronic means. You can think about ways that you could use polling information for people, and not make it only about your company or your not-for-profit entity in your case, but you could be looking at that influencer community and do informal polling of them, asking, are we doing enough? What could we do more to help you? And making that ongoing contact with those institutions. So you're reaching out to them on a regular basis, even just to know what they think. And when they respond and come back to you, it's a good measure to know that they're people that you can ultimately come back to and rely upon to help you. Also, if you're engaged in any kind of effort where you're promoting a particular kind of set of activity that might have a broader balance of impact on the community about issues that you care about and they care about, are they picking up on it through social media? Are they networking to the degree that you'd like them to within their community? And you can pick that up again through social media. So these are things that can be done to be able to determine whether or not that influencer network is really one that you can rely upon and that is really building into your network on a regular basis. I can't say enough about going back out to those people on a regular basis and asking for their opinion. Then they value you because you're asking them, and then you're maintaining ongoing contact with them about the issues that they care about. And I think you'll be able to find good synergy between the issues they care about and the issues that you care about.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions? I think we're coming close to the end of our 2 hours, but I want to give everyone an opportunity.
I was just gonna say one last little thing is,
Yeah.
I love what you were saying about the kind of the government affairs playing in, because that's kind of when we meet with government affairs, internal affairs, that's where we find our synergies and we try and map, all the initiatives that we're tackling in one foul swoop, whether it's like digital inclusion or in the state of North Carolina, agriculture, workforce development, stuff like that. So it's definitely been beneficial to partner with our government affairs and other entities throughout the community or throughout the company to map what we're doing to further show the impact to the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that the CSR function, government affairs, government relations, they're your logical partner and collaborator. When they go out and ask a government official, whether it's an elected or appointed official, for something, it's so valuable to be able to have data provided by people in the CSR space. Before you're going in to talk to the governor of the state, this is the number of volunteer hours that our employees have contributed. This is the amount of matching grants that we've provided. These are the number of people who are serving on boards of critically important social welfare organizations in your community. We used to have that database together. So when a country general manager met with elected officials, they would walk in with that data, and before the person could ask them for something, they would be able to talk to them about what we're already doing. And it changed the level of conversation to be able to look at the company as somebody that was already your clear partner. And it wasn't that they wouldn't ultimately ask you for something, but usually in a different kind of way with a different set of expectations. And it built the relationship in a more effective kind of way. I think that collecting that information and being ready when your government affairs, government programs, whatever you want to call them, goes out to meet with people on a federal level or a local level, electeds or appointeds. Here's the information that we have. This is our level of financial support for not-for-profits that you care about. These are the numbers of volunteer hours. These are the people who sit on boards. That will, I think, influence how they think about the company and be very, very important in setting the stage for what you might want from them.
Great. Thank you, Maya, for all your commentary. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you, Stan. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your leadership in the CSR sector. And I just want to point out that I did put the link, hopefully it works now, to the executive education program at Duke, which as he mentioned, is remote now. So maybe you can join it. There's still openings if you want to register for it. And I also put a link to the flyer for Stan's second book, Breaking Barriers. And don't forget to pick up your copy of The Challenge for Business and Society, which has been purchased for you and it's at the Foundation for the Carolinas, ready to pick up. So thank you all.
I would just
And
say,
yeah, go ahead.
For closing,
Yes.
you know, if anyone on this call has a question for me, if you thought about something you think I could be helpful on, you know, feel free. One of the great advantages of being in the encore career stage is, you know, I don't really have to worry about a full-time job. As Tricia said, I write a monthly column for Barron's. I write books, I teach. But if there's any way that I could be helpful to get this agenda, this positive agenda about corporate social responsibility to be in the forefront and be helpful to any one of you. If you've got a question, feel free to get back to me. It's stanleylitow@gmail.com. If you had reactions to the book or had a thought or another question, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Great. I'll add your email to my follow-up with the group as well. So they can,
Thanks.
you may get more emails than you bargained for, but
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you.